Alrighty, welcome to a new episode of P5Live Sessions, where we are improvising with P5Live, exploring code for an hour and just improvising, doing some live coding without particular aim, maybe getting lucky and accidentally educating both myself and maybe you learn a couple things that you didn't know along the way. But I have a feeling it's more going to be I'll surprise myself and try to remember to use those things in the future. So today I think I'm just going to start out playing with arrays because this is something that I demonstrated to my students. Let's make it a little bigger. To my students today, and yeah, it's always fun demonstrating things and then fun to keep playing with them afterwards. And so I'm going to start out with coordinates that are the position of the mouse and see where it can go from there. So one of the basic things that was set up was having a background saying if the mouse is pressed, pushing into this chords. So grabbing a bunch of points, drawing those points, hopefully you enjoy the sounds of this keyboard clacking. And we're going to cut off a max number of points. So I'm going to say like chords max, which will be defined somewhere up here. We'll start off with chords max equaling 50, just to not have too many points there. So if the size of this array ever gets too big, I'll cut it off. Chords.splice from the 0 index. Hack off anything that's left over. So let's see if we have stuff happening. Chords I, ellipse. And hopefully, all right. Yep, so this was the base setup for demonstrating how an array works, where we're storing things, holding on to a bunch of values that are getting pushed in here. Those values happen to be the mouse X and Y. And right now it's just 50 of them being stored, but it could be far more. Maybe it's good to override this value down here. Chords max equals 150 in case I want to be able to say something like, oop, we're running out of letters. Hello. Almost there. Kind of works. Yeah, so now the question is, what do I want to do with this thing? So I could push and make these points, or it's also fun to generate them from the beginning. I'll start off with like 15 of these things. Give them random width, random height, and I'll throw in a random size of like 10 to 100, because then I could use this as well for its size. So now I can plop these things anywhere on the page, and every refresh get a new set of these static points. And these are super fun because then I get to move the things around. Give them a little bit of wiggle or a lot of wiggle. Or it's nice to add noise to it. This should be based on like frame count times 50. And I know. Why did everything? I know it's where they were supposed to be. And they need to be unique. So this should be like I times 15 plus. Throw that in there. So each one is unique. Maybe 150. Who knows how much these things should be allowed to move. Yeah, nice just giving them some wiggle room. And then every time I refresh, these things are just kind of hanging out in space, doing their thing. And they are alive, so it's possible to run around them, spin around them, rotate them. It's also interesting to draw points where these things are. So I could begin a shape, end a shape, and say vertex to those exact locations. I won't use the Z just yet. That's interesting seeing both. Maybe I disable the fill and set a white stroke. And create, I probably don't need the code to be so big. Let x off be this value here. And generate something similar for the y that will be more off and just a different type of noise. Plus y off. And reconnect them. So now it has almost like starting to look a little locomotive-like. Maybe I'll only have 5 of these things. This can be a little annoying if you change a value in a loop. In P5Live, it will not compile just to be sure that you finished the loop. It won't auto-compile, but you can hold down Shift and do a force recompile. So I can change this and say I'm sure the loop doesn't break. Yeah, this becomes almost tentacle-like in this particular iteration. Yeah, it has something kind of physics-like they depend on each other. It's more of an elastic situation because there's no physics in here at all. Maybe it's interesting to give a fill to those circles so we don't see the inside of them. They're just joints. So I'll say fill should be black and the shape itself should have no fill. Ooh, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? Ah, because the shape is happening after the fact. Interesting. That would mean I have to loop twice through this thing. I turn this off. Yeah, that's kind of weird. We're technically seeing this shape close, but then maybe I say, hey, I wanted a closed shape and see what that does. Not what I was going for, but interesting to see. Actually, I don't know what I'm going for, but that wasn't it. No, what I wanted is to have no fill on this stroke, but to have fill on those circles. So I think it means I just have to loop through the thing twice. So I can technically copy this. It's a bummer to have to do it twice for basically the same things. But actually my points will then maybe they don't match up. If I turn off this one, nope, they're still moving. No, because they're based on the frame count, so they're still moving in the same time. So I can turn off all of this stuff. Yeah, it's a repeat of code, not so nice, but then I get to have these points sitting on top of it, have to test what it's like without a background tracing something out. What does that look like? Maybe these should also have a black stroke, so they kind of erase those lines. And now it just looks like floating lines, so maybe it is a white fill with a black stroke. And not quite what I thought it might do. Let's go back to that previous iteration. Add a bunch of these things. 20 25 of them dancing around. Maybe it's interesting to add this back so I can draw with these things. Whoa, trippy. Wild. Not what I expected to happen, but that's cool. Yeah, so now I can build sort of a squiggly frame out of this thing. It's the same as before, just instead of being all over the page, they're way more limited to exactly where I said they should be. But then that means I get to kind of draw and make interesting zigzags. Kind of looks like some encoded writing system. Let me draw a couple more up. I need more lines. Let's let 250 of these things exist. Ooh, let's start it over. Draw these things out. We still have some of those circles there. They start to disappear. And draw that back. Yeah, it's a nice wiggle. What's really interesting is this like feeding in and running out. Maybe that's nice to take advantage of this fact that it's like they're connected and they kind of coil up at a new location. Has this kind of spring memory like logic. That might be nice to set this to be a new location and kind of run over to somewhere else. And then run over somewhere else and let this thing kind of do its thing. What is this like without a background? Maybe it just quickly fills up. Yes, it does. So then maybe it needs to be twice. Once black, once white, slightly offset. That could be interesting. Let's duplicate this thing for let j equal 0. We just want 2 of them. Put this around the form. And I will say the whole thing needs to be over just a little bit if it's j. So then it should simply be, it's like that plus j, which is 0 or 1 plus j. Now I can see it's a little thicker. And then the stroke has to alternate. So it should be, stroke is j times 255. So 1 should be black, 1 should be white. Whoops. There we go. So they're sort of leaving a bit of a trace. I think I'm going to turn off this aspect up here. Start it over because I just want to draw these things out. And try that thing again where they sort of cluster up in one area. Whoa, look at that crazy noise. Looks a bit like dithered graphics, but a bit smoother at the same time. Let's add a fade. Yeah, it's a question how many of these things make sense to have, but let's let them run around and see what happens. Actually make this fade out more so we can see them a bit better. Just a little bit of blur. I can also just draw in different parts of the screen and let some of them cluster in those regions. Yeah, it's chaotic while it's moving from one place to another, but then once they're there, they are nice and smooth. So let's make something jump across the page every so often. I think I'll have to just create an empty coordinate for this. So I'll say like chords, target, start it off with nothing and have the chords target equal a vector. Start off in the center of the page. And yeah, I think I should say every so often maybe this gets reset. So if the frame count what would it be, like every 6 seconds I can test. Then this equals, we need a random position for this thing. So every 6 seconds we set the target somewhere random, and then I'm not sure how often these things should push and add in that location, but essentially I should just constantly be filling that target in here. So maybe I turn off this value and do a if the frame count modulo 10. I have no idea how often I should be adding this thing. I'll say chords dot push that target. Oh, this is way too often. Equals 0. There we go. Let's start that over. And watch this thing evolve, so it's maybe needs to be more often than this modulo 20, because that's kind of staticky. Yeah, I have a feeling this should probably be all of the time. Maybe. And goodbye. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. It was off the screen. Now it's coming back on the screen, collecting over there. Maybe this needs to be more often, so it gets more locations where to go while it's building these things out. What's it like letting it leave a big old trace? Maybe I give this thing a name, so as I save any of these pictures, I can find them later. Let's call this thing like string clusters. Yeah, they look like really complex 3D garbagey shapes, but it's interesting. It's just 2D, just having a bunch of harsh shadows, leaving traces behind. And this is drawing some kind of a form between them. It's creating, I don't know, it kind of looks like a loom falling apart. But it has a really interesting weaving texture here that's worth trying to take advantage of. Maybe the thing should really just like ping pong back and forth from left to right and kind of leave the center alone. So maybe when I generate a new one, I don't say random width, I do something like, I should floor random 1. No, not floor, I should round a random 1 times width. And then I'll get either, yep, there we go. Then I get either the left or the right. And for some reason, it thinks the width is way bigger than it is. Why is that? Because it's, this is all like plus 250. So this should actually be minus 125 plus, minus 125 plus. And we should make this a variable because we're using it all over the place. So I should make up something called let offset equal 250. No, actually, we'll just make it 125 for now. And then it should be minus offset plus offset. So this thing is centered around that offset. We should type it right. Okay. Yeah, so now it is building these things. Technically, Hopefully that's correct. It should be building these things from left to right, but it looks like it's a bit off the page and barely on the page. It's not quite right. Frustrating. Everything needs to be a little bit further over. Wait, this one we're not using. Are these circles still doing anything? I don't believe so. Let's have just a few of them and see where these things are going and catch them and find out why. Okay, that's why. This should be 250 and this should be divided by 2. Divided by 2, divided by 2. There we go. Now it's along the wall. On either side, it started off in the center, which actually every time it starts off could just be in the 0. Whoops. Yeah, let this build up for a little bit and just see what kind of pattern that makes going from side to side. It would be nice if those lines had some life to them, but they're just traced to the page, so can't really talk to them. Unless we store those positions too. Maybe that's interesting, making like a spaghetti simulator or a spaghetti vision and just make all of these different lines that we see from left to right, throw all of those positions in and yeah, see what happens when those things are kind of alive and you're seeing through them. Could be interesting. Yeah, it starts to build it, just letting it leave a trace. It's building a more and more complex image with all kinds of overweavings. Okay, what else are we going to do? Let's actually have the Y offset be way bigger. Actually, no, let's turn off this vertex. We have no vertex anymore, and turn this ellipse back on and see what those things look like. Whoa, trippy. These are ellipses that look like dancing things. And why is that? Because they have this z-axis of 1. They have no size. Interesting. So now they're just like little squiggle patterns. Interesting. That's because I forgot when I created this target to give it a z-axis. So if this was random 5 to 50, there, now we can see those little things swarming around, having different sizes. I think it's time to copy this, turn one off, and let it go back to being random across the page, so that these things can be anywhere and sort of build up their clusters. There's too many on the wall right now, so I'm going to start it over and let these things build up again, kind of like some weird little minimal amoeba-y biology zoom in. Or it kind of looks like a bunch of people looking from straight down, a bunch of heads clustered. They're not social distancing. I guess as a pack, they're social distancing. Yeah, maybe I'll let this thing build up even faster. What happens if I let it go every 10? Whoa, then we can quickly fill this thing up. Yeah, this is making a surprisingly organic kind of bush. Starts to look a little bit underwater-like. I totally took this away from the string location, so the title isn't correct anymore. Maybe I need to reactivate the other one, clone, and turn this back on. Yeah, but interesting, just letting that thing run and see what it creates. It's kind of bubbling up. But it would be nice if everything had a bit of bubble happening. And a nice way to get that is to use some visual feedback. To just let all that stuff that's there kind of shift around a little bit on its own. That way everything new coming on top is just kind of feeding into that feedback. Okay, so I'm going to quickly pause our choral and reactivate the string version that I had. I'm going to turn this off, turn this back on. I want to try and be better at saving these different versions. So this was the previous one that was going on, and now I'm going to clone this thing. This was the string clusters, and I'm going to clone it and call this new one choral. Choral, I think. And turn off the vertex, turn on the ellipse, and swap those back and get these things back. Oh, the size, the speed was different on the string clusters. I'm going to put that back at 100, where it was way calmer, chilling for a while at one side. Okay, that was some maintenance. Hopefully it wasn't disturbing. And now what I'm going to do is clone it yet again and call this one feedback. Because it's fun to leave it as it was doing its thing, and then it's always fun to add feedback. Can never have enough feedback. I'm just going to call this thing feedback. And I say feedback is a create graphics that is the width, by the height. Basically visual feedback, just constantly getting the frame and showing that image back to myself. So at the very bottom of the sketch, I can say FB is actually a get from 0, 0 with height. Sometimes that can be super slow. It depends on what else is happening. I can see this. For now, it seems okay. Sometimes it's also good to resize the thing and like right after getting, shrinking it down. So this is grabbing the feedback, and now I'm going to play back the feedback. If I can see my code, this is actually a nice camouflage mode for code. Let's see. We need to show the thing. So I need to do a couple things. I should really set my image mode to center. So it's from the center out. And then I should say image. Oh, damn, killed it. Feedback width divided by 2, height divided by 2. And technically with height. Yeah, with height. There we go. Ooh, whoa, trippy, trippy. Wow, never seen that. I mean, I've seen feedback, but without scaling it at all. This is creating, what is that? It's like almost like a sand or something. I forget the name of this type of algorithm. There's a name for this. It was an amazing app back in like 2012 or 13 for iOS, Android, where you could just sort of touch a couple spots on the screen and it sanded out. I think it was called Sabo or something like this. But I really like that initial moment where I started and I should hide my cursor. And we get really like choral blending out. Floral choral. Yeah, and it starts to also look like an inverted picture. It's interesting. It's almost like I should see what my screen looks like inverted. There's probably a clever trick to invert the screen. Maybe I could do it even with CSS and just tell tell this window to be inverted, but I'll also just test out swapping the fill and stroke here. So here I had a stroke that's actually 255, and I'm going to swap them and say 0, 255, and start it over one more time. Want, want, want. Interesting. That sort of oozing out doesn't happen anymore. But maybe this is the positive. If I was to invert the other picture, this is maybe what I would see. Yeah, but it's also nice. Usually feedback doesn't have that much effect when you don't play with the scale. I usually have to say like zoom a little bit in, a little bit out to get an effect. But here it's just becoming a cool kind of mushy. So 2 things to try. It's probably nice to make it where you could push the mouse button and flop those 2 things. To just like on demand invert it, so I could start out in this mode where it's kind of doing that and then flip it back and flip it back. Or it might be really nice just to let these things decide for themselves in which of those 2 modes are they. So let's have that be the default, and I'll just do a random thing. If random1 is more than, you have a 50% chance. Then we do the opposite. So now we're going to get a little bit of flashy vision, but hopefully it's small enough it doesn't have an effect for anyone with epilepsy. I have a feeling, as far as I know, the whole screen has to be flashing, not just a small part of it when you can still focus. We might be making a dragon fruit generator. Still not as interesting as that first one. It is making a more dynamic texture maybe, but that first moment of it sort of bleeding out is super cool. So let's see if we can exploit that. So I'm going to turn off this thing that we tried out. It's also really interesting how slow that happens when it's these little guys. So maybe I need to tell these circles to be way smaller. Don't let them initialize very big, and maybe start out super small to super small. What's that like, starting out really small to really small? Interesting. Yeah, now it's like we're making crystals, but it's not. It's a little overblown out. So let's start it over once, getting a little bit bigger. Even bigger. And then I think it's time to play with zooming a little bit in and out of the feedback, and maybe resizing the feedback a little bit so it's not quite as sharp, and then a certain zoom effect will happen. Yes, that didn't make a huge difference actually, it just produced. So actually I should do the opposite. I should let them get huge and see what happens when they're really big. And now it kind of looks like they're burning into the paper. But they look very much like clusters of circle. So let's tweak this feedback a little bit and see what happens. I'm going to say feedback.resize. And it is normally width and height. So it's going to be, actually I'll turn that off for a sec and make up something called scale that is 0.99. So this can be scale, width times scale, height times scale. And now technically the feedback is like 1% smaller than the canvas, but that's not making a huge difference. And I can see my computer super happy doing this as some of those dots slow down. Didn't see a big difference. Let's make the scale drastically smaller, 10%. In the end, it might just make a fuzzy picture. Ooh, but that did something different. Now they're kind of, it looks like they're fading out earlier before they go and meet. Just barely finding their way out there. But this resize function might really be slowing me down. Didn't seem so happy for that. In general, I could also be trying to change my pixel density, but I'm sure the computer would be happy if I did that. If I said pixel density 1, things will get a little oversoft. Yep, that totally killed everything. But if I did 1.5, okay. Yeah, maybe it's interesting to find out where do I still get that sand-like quality while reducing the pixel resolution, because I'm on my Retina laptop display. It's looking a little fuzzy. And let me play with the scale of it here, because if this feedback is a little bit, whoa, trippy, what happened there? This is why we have to test all the numbers. You're not allowed to like set a number and walk away. You have to literally change every single number that's in there. What a trip. And this is the difference of the pixel resolution at 1.4 versus 1.3. I'm going to let that build up for a while. And now we have, this almost looks like this digital camo that some countries have. Trippy. Yeah, it's both beautiful and ugly. It's got crazy structures in the inside there where it has these really harsh lines. But that's wild. That's the difference of 1.4 versus 1.3 was super smooth. So what is 1.5? I think I already tried out. Looked fairly normal. So we should try 1.35 and see what are these spots in the middle like. No, 1.45 would be in the middle. There's something about 1.4. 1.44. 43. Similar, not too drastically different. Yeah, but I think I wish I should look into what is happening here exactly. I probably have to go look at the function for pixel density and find out exactly where that plays a role. It's got to play a role. And I don't know, in the way it's rendering to the canvas. But such a trip that this 1.4 makes such a pixelated. There it is again. What about 3.9? These 1 steps above 4 did nothing. Nope. Interesting. 1.4. What about 1.41? Nope. Okay, maybe it has something to do with what about 1.8? Yep. Interesting. So something about this 0.4. Yeah, it would be interesting if somebody knew about this. Have to do more tests. So pixel vision, accidental pixel vision. What about 2. Oh shit, that would be dangerous. 2.2. Also pixelated. Trippy. Something about staying on this even number. But surprisingly, it didn't do it with 1.0. Or did it? 0.6. It does it. Hey, on these 0.4s, we can get this pixel vision. Is it also with 0.8? I don't think so. Nope. Found a crazy feature bug. That's interesting. Yeah, so this is something to definitely exploit in the future. Making feedback on, what about 0.2? That's just crushing it. Can barely see anything, but it starts off, like I said, 0.2, 0.6, 1.4, 1.8 gives this special kind of pixel vision. Okay, I was having fun getting lost in pixel vision, but actually I was happy with it being smoother. I'm just going to leave a note and say 0.6, 1.4, 1.8 to remember to play with those later. And now I wanted to zoom in a little bit to this instead of just leaving it at 100% of the width and height. So I'm going to do another scale. I'm going to call it let FB scale equal 1.01 to zoom in a little bit. Ooh, and now it zooms out to the side. It zooms into it. This is way more than I intended, just a little bit. There we go. Wow, cool. And now it's really an image that needs to be inverted to see what this thing looks like. We are looking into some kind of cloud now. And I can already tell I need to turn those things off every once in a while because I don't always want this plopping on top of it. So I'm going to, it's this one I believe, turn off the ellipse for a minute so it can fade out and build my little cloud vision. The storm is coming. Plop some more of those things. Yeah, it's almost like it needs 2 levels of feedback because then that whole cloud thing should also kind of zoom in and out. But maybe it will if I just let it be a little bit more zoomy. It's actually just getting more and more complex as it just kind of leaves little traces that eventually get zoomed off the page. It's pretty fun watching this. It's kind of exploiting the same thing as a tool that I made called Feedback Painter. I think it's feedback-painter.glitch.me, which is also just playing with different amounts of feedback and what happens when it's a big zoom and a little zoom. But it's always a question, how do you leave a mark when leaving feedback? Because feedback is that trace that gets left behind, but to get feedback, you have to feed something into the system. And then it's fun to figure out, like, what should you feed into it while it regurgitates itself and builds up and builds up. Okay, I think I've let this thing build long enough. I'm going to turn off that one more time and get one more snapshot out of this. Every once in a while, I'm pressing Control S in P5Live, and that is saving me both a screenshot PNG and a snapshot of the code. So I constantly have whatever the code was at that point in time. And we're going to play with the scale in the other direction. So this was really good. I'm going to keep this mark down. It's like just barely zooming in. And now I would do the opposite, 999. And at first, I'll let it build on top of this, but then I think I want to start it over from scratch and see what would this whole image look like. Zoomed in. And now, of course, it's interesting when you zoom in, when the feedback hits the wall and kind of pulls in colors from the edge. Yeah, and Feedback Painter had started with an interest to try and see if code could get at all similar to what happens with oil paints or watercolors. They have these way more organic movements. And feedback, I think, is a pretty close way to get there. Okay, I'm going to start it over. Just because all kinds of things happen that you just cannot anticipate. Yeah, so it'd be interesting if how this could also be used for visuals. It's kind of a slow image it builds up, but maybe those little clusters could activate and be a certain size and a certain chaos based on the sound. I'll start doing some VJ style sessions, still trying to figure out which audio to use that's copyright free or allowed to be in the background, but I plan to every couple weeks react to audio because that's where it's super fun to play as well. Okay, turn off. Maybe it's interesting to let these sizes get much bigger for a little bit just to see what happens. Let them get huge. What kind of image does that leave? And back to small. Yeah, it added a bit more dynamic. Interesting how these ellipses just become balloon-like rounder structures. Let's make them even bigger. Let that leave a little bit of trace and turn off the ellipse and have it finish melting that picture downward. And try the same thing in the other direction. Let's turn this back on. Maybe 1.00. Oh, so it's just barely zooming in. And let those things, whoa, be really large again and see what happens. The feedback gets addictive. I could just sit here and play with that endlessly, but maybe I go back and check out what happens through this light feedback that's in place now with like the other string sketch that had been deactivated. So if I reactivate this one, it's still doing its thing kind of chaotically. Maybe I turn this back on so it stays on the edges. Let's start it over, in fact. Maybe it's already zooming in too much. Maybe I need to give this a chance just to zoom, whoops, 1.0. Not so sharp. Just kind of becomes a blurry mess. And if we go back to zooming out, let this thing slowly zoom away from us. Maybe feedback is a little bit cheating. I don't have to do too much. I could be making noise, just splatters anywhere, and these complex images would appear. But it's a question exactly what is the best splatter to program to feed into that system. And maybe I turn off, I'm going to turn off this targets thing again, and maybe go back to where I was way back at the beginning, where I was drawing those lines out, and see what that's like when we go back to these wiggly structures. Let's see what a couple of those, it's down to just 50 of them. That's why it's running out. So I'm going to start this thing over. There we go. That's not even enough. Yeah, interesting. It's almost like it's kind of smoking off of that form. Have all kinds of air traffic in the background. I'm going to let it hold on to more of these things. So maybe 250 of them. So I can draw a strip up at the top, maybe one in the middle, and one at the bottom. I could probably be more efficient in the way that I draw these things because it's connecting them. Like I could go across. Oop. I could go across. 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 Back up. Over to there. And up to there. Oop, have to erase a couple more points. There we go. Yeah, maybe it's interesting to see what this looks like in low pixel mode. Let's go back to 1.4 where it got all pixelated. Maybe 150 is far more than I need. I could probably get away with just 100 of these things. I can find out as it trashes the one. Whoop. Let's build that box again. There we go. Yeah, really crazy how satiny those shadows are that go down into this feedback. Maybe it's interesting just playing with circles, letting these back to when I had just random positions and let those things be kind of circles that wiggle around a bit because it just has to wiggle to get that shape. It also helps, I guess, that this has like a black and a white stroke right next to each other. Let's put, oops. Put this one back on to zoom in. Yep, let's quickly tweak a couple of these things before we run out of time. So I'm going to start this off with 15 random points. And I'm going to stop drawing this here vertex. I'm going to go back to an ellipse, but without a fill. I want to say no fill. And if I started over from scratch, we definitely need it to once in a while be an opposite colored stroke, so it can leave a pattern behind. Which is too sporadic. So we're going to have that thing either do a frame count modulo and fade its way, or better yet, it should be a sine wave, I think. But this is kind of interesting, actually, that they'll all get really bright and then get dark. No, but I think they should get their own. They should each get their own sine wave. Times 255, and then I plus, whoops, I times 15 plus to give them some difference to each other. So they're at different time rates of one another. And this is interesting what happens with this kind of boxing, the way the feedback, where the resolution is being a bit crunched, it forms some folds in the canvas. Let's try it at 0.5 where it was smoother. Maybe some of these things should be gigantic so we can see inside of them. I'm going to say you're allowed to be up to 500. Maybe that's not enough. 1500, what does that do? Whoa, too many, too big. Yep, I think I want them to be much smaller and make like one gigantic one, just to give some interesting scale. It'll be from like 1,000 to 3,000, just for something breaking the composition. Yeah, it's also nice. Before it was constantly really going into the center. I could also change that by having the feedback wobble just a little bit left and right. It's less dominant in the center like it was before, because the shapes are so distributed. Let me generate a new scene. Yeah, but I have a feeling that this feedback, just the slight change where this like sand like quality happened, is going to be so dependent on the resolution of the screen, whether it's full screen or having the menu bar. I think there's so many variables at play to test out, and what difference this pixel density makes. Build another one, and maybe let the feedback wobble back and forth a bit. Maybe I don't need quite so many. Maybe it's better if it's fewer shapes. And it was this guy here. This needs like a little bit of wobble. Let's say let feedback X equal, we need noise on this. Don't want it moving too much back and forth. Maybe it should be let the offset of feedback be 10. Minus that divided by 2. Okay, just giving these slight feedback X plus feedback Y to see what happens. Oh, that's way too much movement. But just when these things aren't too static, it's nice to let it wiggle a bit, but maybe this just needs to be a tiny little number. Yeah, now we have to let these things run for a while. Yeah, the question came up in the chat. Would be great to learn how to send sound channels from Ableton to control different shapes in the circles. And yeah, maybe as a point, we're running out of time. We're like a minute away from 10 o'clock. But as where to look for this, let me get my mouse back. Where are you? Down at the very bottom in the demos. There's some new stuff coming up for the next release of P5Live coming soon, working on, but under hardware, input. I would recommend exactly check out this OSE input, and for that, it's the setup should be set up for both input output from OSE, but I've definitely been using it mainly for VJing with getting input signals from OSE, and you can have as many channels as that allows, and then just map them wherever it should go across the channels. And with audio, you don't get so many. It's really hard picking the microphone inside of the browser. I have to do crazy tricks with audio MIDI setup to convince the browser which microphone it's using. But potentially, maybe you mainly use OSE and then give the actual audio a little bit of a boost on top of it. Yeah, but maybe that's something to explore in the future, is how to, MIDI, definitely. Also an example there for MIDI. MIDI is possible to collaborate really easily across the internet. OSE really need to be local to share that signal. But there's all kinds of possibilities. I'm going to point this out. Tutorials will be coming soon for P5Live. I really need to walk through some of the features and how exactly they work. There's been a bunch of features since this summer that need to be explained. Especially inside of co-coding is something called sync data waiting for you, where it lets you send MIDI data across the internet from your computer to their computer and can open up all kinds of cool collaborative possibilities. So maybe in the near future, I should collaborate with some of you out there who are producing signals. That could be fun to react to. But we've done an hour. That was a fun improvisation hour. It went in a few different domains. Next week we'll be back with something completely different. Next Tuesday at 9 o'clock Central European Time. So thanks for watching. Thanks for streaming later. See you next time.